Fighting type decks have had a lot of success recently, and that is for quite a few reasons. One of which is that there's quite a few of them running about. For example, right now the second most played deck in the game is Lucario Hariyama. On top of that, you've got a really fun kind of single prize box deck with Okidogi, and then in my opinion the best one, you've got Cynthia's Garchomp. So these are the main three fighting type decks, but today we're going to be taking a look at Cynthia's Garchomp. But before we look at Cynthia's Garchomp, let's take a look at why the fighting type is just so good. So this is one of the most common decks in the game right now, Lucario, and it just shows why fighting type decks are really good. First of all, Solrock and Lunatone are an incredible draw engine. And how do they function, you may ask? Well, Lunatone has an ability called Lunacycle, which says once during a turn, if you have Solrock in play, you may use this ability, and if you use it, you discard a fighting energy and draw 3 cards. Drawing 3 cards is really good. If you take a look at Pheasantipity, right, Pheasantipity draws you 3 cards once your Pokemon was knocked out, and it's played in almost every single deck, except for fighting decks, funnily enough, because most of them have built-in draw engines, thanks to Lunatone and Solrock. So, it is just a really strong ability and a really strong core. It's a great engine in a lot of these fighting type decks. On top of that, you have Fighting Gong, which is arguably the best item card in the game. It searches the deck for either a basic fighting Pokemon or a basic fighting energy. So essentially it can help you set up your Solrock and Lunatone, but it can also help you draw cards by finding energy to discard with said Lunatone. Right, and then on top of that, fighting type Pokemon are usually synonymous with dealing big amounts of damage. You've got Mega Lucario over here, which deals 270 damage for 2 energy, but you can bump this number up with Premium Power Pro. It states that if you play that card, your fighting Pokemon just deal 30 more damage, right, that turn. You have 4 of them, so if you play all 4 at the same turn, you're dealing 120 extra damage, which is kind of dumb, right? You're dealing a lot of damage. And fighting Pokemon, the EXs usually have 2 attacks, one of which is a set up attack, and the second of which is a big Oko attack. You can see that with Lucario, as the first attack, Aura Jab, sets up energy and deals a smaller amount of damage, and then the second attack deals a large amount of damage. And usually these second attacks have these stipulations where you either can't attack on the following turn, or you have to discard all of the energy. And the Mega Lucario says, you know, you just can't attack with Mega Brave. So the idea is you use Aura Jab to set up benched Pokemon to attach energy to those guys, then you use Mega Brave, and then the following turn you go back to Aura Jab and you kind of keep cycling these attacks. But enough about Lucario, let's take a look at the actual topic of today's video. So this is Cynthia's Garchomp. Cynthia's Garchomp, just like Lucario, has 2 attacks, one of which is a setup attack for a single energy, and the second of which is a attack that is there to Oko stuff. That, you know, does a lot more damage, and it costs 2 energy, and it has that stipulation of discarding all energy from this Pokemon. So, Corkscrew Dive is a really, really good attack. It does 100 damage for 1 energy, which in on its own isn't bad, and it also draws until you have 6 cards in hand, which is just pretty good, because a lot of the times you might be missing something, and you can Corkscrew Dive, take a knockout, draw a bunch of cards, and then on the following turn you just have a much better turn, and you can probably boss order something with Draconic Buster, and just win the game. And with Iono being out of the format, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to be disrupted, so Corkscrew Dive gives you a lot more value than it did pre-rotation, and that is really important because this is a very much so combo heavy deck. However, this is a deck that doesn't need too much going on in its hand, rather on the board. So let's take a look at a deck list. This is the list we're taking a look at today, and I think this is one of the best ways to play Garchomp. So, like we've said, Garchomp is a good attacker on its own, right? But what happens when we add consistency to that? What happens when we add even more damage and also even more health? Well, let's start off with the consistency. So Gabite is probably the strongest card in this deck. With the ability Champion's Call, once during a turn you may search your deck for a Cynthia's Pokemon and put it into your hand. Very, very simple. So let's take for example a bench of 3 Gibbles and a Roselia, right? With these 3 Gibbles, we can evolve one of them into a Gabite with a singular Pokepad, and then from there we can use Champion's Call to search for another Gabite and evolve a benched Gibble. And then we can use that one's Champion Call to search for another Gabite and evolve the Gible. And then we can use that one's champion call to search for a Roserade and evolve the Roserade. We can get an entire board state of stage 1s set up in a single turn with a single card like Pokepad. And on the following turn, we could do the exact same thing except start establishing stage 2s and even more Roserades. So that is just really strong, right? And it's a stage 1 which can be searched out by Pokepads and has a really, really good ability. And on top of that, it has a pretty solid attack. Dragon Slice does 40 damage, which doesn't do a lot, right? But this number can add up really quickly when you start using things like Premium Power Pro. But you might notice that this deck doesn't play Premium Power Pros like Lucario. It only plays 2 of them. And that's because we also play Roserade, and Roserade has a really nice ability, which is attacks used by your Cynthia's Pokemon deal 30 more damage, right? It's very simple, it's just a built-in Premium Power Pro, except permanently, right? Until this card is off of the field, all of your Cynthia's Pokemon are dealing more damage. So for example, if you have 2 of these in play, it means you have a permanent plus 60 damage. Now all of a sudden, this Gabite for a singular energy is dealing 100 damage on a 1-prizer, which is just pretty good, right? That's knocking out stuff like Dracloak, which is quite nice. And then Gible will be doing 80, right? Which is knocking out stuff like Dreepy. So all of a sudden, these small, tiny little attacks are actually dealing pretty good damage. But that is not the main appeal. The main appeal is the Garchomp, right? Which is now doing 160 damage with 2 Roserades, or 190 damage with 3 Roserades, and that's knocking out stuff like Pheasantipity and Meowth, because obviously those are weak to it, right? And it means Draconic Buster, the main attack, is dealing a lot more damage as well. With 2 of these guys in play, you are dealing 320 damage, which is a great number to hit, because that's knocking out Dragapult, and that's knocking out Blaziken, and cards like that. And if you add 1 Premium Power Pro, now you're dealing 350, which is knocking out most things in the format, and, you know, hitting those really important numbers as well on something like a opposing Mega Lucario. But you might be thinking, you know, it has 330 HP, which is really good, obviously, for a stage 2. But what happens if we just, you know, got more? You know, a lot of Megas have upwards of, you know, 380 HP with Mega Venusaur. So what do we do about that? Well, we play Cynthia's Power Weight. Cynthia's Power Weight gives our Cynthia's Pokemon 70 more health, which is just broken. It means our Garchomp is a 400 HP 2-prizer, right? Mega Lucario has 340 HP, which is 60 less. And it's also worth 3 prize cards. Less HP and worth more prize cards. So Cynthia's Garchomp is incredible because it's only doing 10 less damage on its second attack compared to Mega Lucario, but it has a higher damage output when you have Roserades and also Premium Power Pros. And on top of that, you can power this guy up in a single turn because your A-Spec is Neo Upper Energy. The only problem with Garchomp is that it sometimes tends to struggle to actually, you know, be able to chain Draconic Busters. So the idea is that you'll use a Garchomp, you'll attach an energy, use Corkscrew Dive, hopefully take a prize card, or even 2 if you are knocking out something like a Meowth. Then on the following turn, you'll attach another energy, use Draconic Buster, take 2 more prize cards, now you've taken 4 total, and then you'll use 1 more Draconic Buster with another Garchomp with the Neo Upper Energy, which is just obviously really, really powerful. Now you might be thinking, what happens if Dragapult starts targeting down your little Gabites and stuff? Well, if you try and play the game a little bit slower, you can start attaching Rocky Energies, and it is really important because Rocky Energy prevents all effects of attacks done to your fighting Pokemon that its card is attached to. For example, if you're playing a deck that plays Mega Absol, you can now attach Rocky Energy to Garchomp, and then they just can't terminal period it, right? They have to attack it twice. And if they have to attack it twice, that means they are leaving damage on board. They are leaving 200 damage, which you can fling back at them. Not in the way with Monkey Dories and stuff, but in the Zoroark way of raging... What is that attack called? Not Raging Thunder. That's Rampaging... Not Rampaging Thunder either. Powerful Rage. That's the attack. That took me way too long for someone who only plays Zoroark, right? You can use Powerful Rage, essentially, with Spiritomb. So Spiritomb, for a single energy, does 10 damage for each damage counter on all of your Cynthia's Pokemon. So if you have 3 Roserades in play, and you get hit by 200 damage, you can now bring in Spiritomb for a single energy and deal 290 damage on a 1-prizer. Right? Really, really powerful attack there. Or, for example, let's say we're playing against Alakazam. Alakazam is one of the best decks in the game as well. If we take a look at the decks in the game, well, Alakazam is sitting over in number 3. It is the third most played deck with a 6% meta share. And you might be thinking, Alakazam probably beats this deck. However, I would argue against that for a few reasons. One of which is Garchomp will have 400 health throughout the game, meaning they have to consistently have 20 cards in hand to actually one-shot our Garchomp. But what happens if we just don't want them to attack us? What if we want them to do 0 damage? Well, since Rocky Helmet prevents all effective attacks done to our fighting Pokemon, Alakazam can't deal damage to us, right? Alakazam deals damage counters, which is not actual damage, meaning it just can't attack us. So we can just sit there with a Garchomp, dealing corkscrew dives, 100 damage every single turn. It's not one-shotting them, unfortunately, but they're just not doing anything back to us because they literally cannot attack us. So it is a very, very powerful card as well. So we pair the Cynthia's Power Weight with a 330 HP Pokemon, meaning we are now 400 HP. We pair that with Rocky Energy, meaning we can't be affected by effective attacks. We pair that with Free Retreat, meaning we can pivot in and out of the active however we want, and we've got ourselves a really strong primary attacker, right? We have the consistency of the fighting type decks. However, we're not playing the Lunatone and Solrock, we're playing the Gabite, because this deck doesn't really play that many basic fighting energy, and it doesn't really need energy in the discard pile. So we've got this as our consistency engine. We've got damage amplification with Roserade and Premium Power Pro. We've got a good one prize attacker to punish our opponents for getting too aggressive on us, and we've got a obviously really good Cynthia's Garchomp primary attacker and our ace spec, which helps us chain attacks together. And then on top of that, we've got a really consistent kind of supporter line. 4 Boss's Orders, 4 Lee's Determination, 2 Hilda. Hilda is so good in this deck as well because it can get you in the Upper Energy, it can get your Rocky Energy, and it can also get your evolutions, right? Then we've got Judge for a little bit of disruption because, we don't play on Face Stamp, so we want to disrupt our opponents every once in a while sometimes. Then we have Surfer, which can switch, which is just the main thing. You don't really want your opponent to kind of trap a Roserade. Then we've got some really powerful items, right? The Fighting Gong, we've already gone over why that's so good. Pokepad can essentially set up your entire board at once. You've got Buddy Puffin to kind of, build up your hand from the beginning. Then we've got Pokegear to find these supporters, right? And on top of that, just keep in mind, Cynthia's Power Weight is really, really powerful because it also helps your one prizes. For example, if you don't really want to evolve your Gabite against Dragapult because you want to keep finding stuff like Roserades on the following turn, or for example, if your opponent is targeting down your Roserades, right? Let's say your opponent has 10 damage already on a Cynthia's Roselia, and you already want this to die, and you can't really get a Roserade up that turn, you can now attach a Cynthia's Power Weight to the Roselia itself, meaning this now has 140 HP. And all of a sudden, it's actually pretty difficult to deal with, right? Dragapult can't cheat out easy prize cards because even if they put all 6 damage counters on the Roselia, it's just not going to die even in 2 Phantom dives, right? Same thing with Cynthia Spiritomb, right? It'll have 140 HP. So it is just really powerful to kind of survive these smaller attacks, right? On top of that, if you are playing against something like the Lucario, and Lucario loves to cheese out these early prize cards with that Solrock, you can essentially set your Gibble up with 140 HP, meaning they can't cheese out these early knockouts. And if we take a look at the meta, I think Garchomp has a pretty good matchup against Dragapult. I think it's a pretty good matchup against Lucario Hariyama, a pretty good matchup against Alakazam Dunsparce, good matchup against Blaziken. I think it's a questionable matchup against Dusknoir. It's a good matchup against Zoroark. Probably a pretty bad matchup against Mewtwo, to be honest, because Grass Weakness. Stormy Frostlass, also probably a bit questionable because of all the abilities. Ogerpon Meganium, probably a bit questionable as well over there. But the higher up we go, it's doing pretty good. I think it's a pretty good pick for upcoming events. I think it's a pretty good deck. It's consistent, it hits hard, and it has a lot of HP and a lot of random tools at its disposal, right? It just has some really powerful cards that it can just, slap together, and all of a sudden you've got a behemoth of a Pokemon hitting hard and tanking hard and swinging back even harder, right? And once these things are on board, you don't really have to maintain your board, right? Gabite maintains it for you. So it's a pretty good deck.